And so met Dr. Powell, who had been researching like autistic savants. And through that work, she had heard from parents, look, I don't think they're just to have a photographic memory. I think a lot of these kids are reading our minds. And so she started testing that. The scientists started giving it a name, a telepathy train, because they were basically being like, we're not just going to tell you the video you're trying to send to us telepathically. I'm going to tell you the video that this person is going to try to send to this person telepathically 2 hours from now. And it would be correct. Even the hill, like, I know so many people have talked about it and so many non-speakers talk about it. And there's always that part in the back of my brain, but like, but can it actually be possible? It's so unbelievably, how can it be?
It's my pleasure today to have with me Ky Dickens, who's a filmmaker and the creator of the Telepathy Tapes podcast. Thank you so much for being here today, Ky.
Absolutely. Pleasure to be here.
All right. Well, I think the first question I want to ask is, before the Telepathy Tapes, you were making films about social issues. So how did you
Mhm.
become interested in telepathy? Because that seems like a pretty big departure from what you were doing before.
Definitely a big departure and something I did not want anyone to know I was working on, when I was kind of working on my other projects and this was happening in the background. Um, but it was kind of a personal thing. I had two close friends actually die and was in a bit of my own kind of cognitive dissonance about what does this all mean and where do we go and what's the point of all this um, and I had a friend come over that was kind of like, you should just really start asking questions. And I think you won't feel lost because there's a lot there for science-minded people if you feel like you have that want to look. And then I kinda made the decision, okay, like, I wanna answer some of these questions, like, what is consciousness? Where does it go? Why? Why do we have it? And, for many documentary filmmakers out there, we spend a lot of time developing something, often sometimes months, sometimes years, without before you ever even get paid, if you even do. So I thought, well, whatever I'm gonna work on next, I wanna spend my time becoming, hopefully, invested and really, like, thoroughly, almost an expert, if you will, and, like, in some of these areas around consciousness, and I didn't know where this would take me. I was just trying to find an answer that I needed to find, and I started reading books on reincarnation and simulation theory and remote viewing, like anything that I could get my hands on to try to understand, and then, I came across the work of Dr. Powell, and it was really weird because it just hit me like a lightning bolt, like, "Oh, this is it." Like, whatever it is, it's here. And so met Dr. Powell, who had been researching like autistic savants. And through that work, she had heard from parents, look, I don't think they're just to have a photographic memory. I think a lot of these kids are reading our minds. And so she started testing that. And then, she's a brilliant scientist and had been, doing these tests. But then I started kind of working with the families, meeting the families, talking to the families. And that's where I sort of came to realize, okay, this is widespread, not over just America, but all over the world. And it goes back decades. It's not new. People have been reporting this and it's even been published, going back to the 1950s, 1970s. So um, I kind of felt like, wow, this is the best kept secret in the world. If this many teachers and therapists and parents and siblings and religious leaders and scientists have been reporting this, it's just like how do we pull the dots together to in a way that people could believe it? Um, and that became my obsession about 4 years ago.
Well, that segues nicely into the spellers and spelling, because I think that's one of the questions I had was initially, if you're not familiar with your podcast, then what those two things are. So can you explain for the
Yeah,
viewers when you're talking about spelling, what you actually mean
yeah.
and who the spellers are? Because we're going to talk about them some more.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what I quickly started to gather when talking to parents, actually it's interesting because a lot of, some of this has been documented in people who were able to speak, but the majority of the people that I was coming across had children who were non-speakers, usually diagnosed with something called apraxia, which is a mind-body disconnect, right? So your body is not doing what your mind wants it to do, which is can be really frustrating. And for people with apraxia, fine motor skills are really difficult. So something like sign language would be very hard. Something like drawing could be really hard. Writing could be hard. But someone along the way figured out that pointing to letters on a letterboard or something like that is a gross motor skill. So people with apraxia can learn through a lot of practice and training, really, of like how to like get your body to move and do the right thing. And there's a lot of kind of audible coaching required in anything to do with apraxia, like, okay, make your foot, you go forward now. Okay, sit your body down now. Okay, come back up again now. Like trying to give it a cue to when to go and when to stop and where to go. So with a bunch of training, a person can learn to spell their thoughts to communicate. Often that starts on big letter boards with just 3 or 6 letters. Then it gets to a smaller letter board. And for many individuals, that especially that we're working with in our film and also, podcasts and stuff, eventually are start to spell into a keyboard, like a QWERTY keyboard or into an iPad and are able to communicate independently. I always like to say just for families out there though who might be listening that like some children might never get to the QWERTY keyboard, right? They might always need a letter board or that type of thing, and that's fine. I think the most important thing is that people are communicating and getting out of what many non-speakers call their silent prison of not being able to even say what they want for dinner, you know?
I watched some of your films, and it's interesting how it's a it's like they kind of some of them throw their hand. You can see how
Yeah.
much effort it requires to control their
Mhm.
body. So it must be pretty amazing for them to go from that sort of real basic movement to actually be able to then work with a keyboard. So have you seen many spellers that have graduated all the way down to a keyboard?
Yeah, yeah, quite a few actually, and it's quite remarkable. Like with the telepathy tests that we did in the film, um, we were working with spellers that were in a separate room from the person that was sending, the telepathic cue, and it's just really cool, watching spellers who have gotten that much body control that they can type right into a computer keyboard. Akil, who is in the telepathy tapes episode 2, like he can just boom, 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 spell right into an iPad. One thing that is really interesting is I've met some spellers who will need to spell out first on a letterboard and then like because it's like almost like the motor memory, and then from there they can go and spell into a keyboard. So, I feel like they always say if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And I'd say that's true for non-speakers with apraxia as well. Like everyone's different. And that's why coaches and spelling teachers and speech pathologists become really important here because having the right ethos of like really patiently figuring out what's going to work for someone is so important. There's a communication language teacher who has her own clinic. Her name is Maria in Chicago. She's brilliant. And the way she spends time for each of her students, like she's figured out that some students want like kind of sticky tape behind each letter so that when they hit the letter, there's like a feedback loop, like boom, it like, kind of sticks to you. Some people want to put a pencil right through a letter. Some people want like dangly stuff on the letter so that when it goes through it feels really concrete. Like this is the letter, right? You're not just somewhat poking it. You're making it very clear the letter you want. So everyone's different. It's just figuring it out how to help someone get out of their, to be able to communicate this way.
There's an idea there for an inventor, isn't there? Because it's like a haptic feedback that you have on your phones. It's not actually a
Yeah.
button being pressed. It's because it's haptic feedback. It's just giving you back
Mhm.
some electricity. Or you can
Yeah.
imagine a big board that does the same kind of thing. When they touch it, it kind of gives them that. It's sort of
Yeah.
electronic, but not actually mechanical.
Well, it's
Um,
cool too because like, in the film, we watched this, spelling coach, his name is Austin, and it's kinda cool seeing, like, a male coach because so I think so often people just think of, like, women in these roles of, like, special education and, teaching in general, and Austin has worked with so many non-speakers, and it's really cool watching him do it because, he has the whole process of starting with these big letter boards and going smaller and smaller and smaller. And he talks about a battery kind of forming sometimes between the speller, the coach, and the letterboard, that there's, like, some sort of, like, you know, like, cool energy that forms, and what was cool is at one point we asked one of the non-speakers, not in the podcast originally, but who's in the film, his name is Winston, um, one of his spelling coaches asked him, "If we could have, like, an AI robot holding the letterboard for you, could you do it as well?" And he said, "No, because the shared of tension of a human sitting here helps to pierce my apraxia." So there's something beautifully rich about having another human being grounding you with intention and love and patience just sitting there, um, waiting for you to speak and helping you.
that's amazing that
It's
he said that in that way.
Mhm.
That's that kind of language. Now, I've heard you mention this before on the podcast, like the particular style of speaking and language that spellers use is there's something quite unique about it. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, and it's again like a huge population, so you can't point ever, it's hard to say like a big broad thing, but but there's many, many parents and teachers who we've worked with or interviewed who have said that their spellers will communicate in this way that feels very like Old English, almost like poetry, with words that you don't typically we wouldn't I mean, I wouldn't typically use, or the coach or the parent might say, like, "I would never use that," they'll say, like, "This person was downtrodden and crestfallen at the sight of the dawn breaking from their blood." Like this beautiful sentence where it's like, "Okay," Um, and yeah, and it's really beautiful. It's almost this, um, eloquent, formal language that sometimes doesn't even, adhere to the same language patterns, that or slang that I would use or someone else might use. The other thing that's, interesting too, like, there's this dad, Scott, he's in the podcast, he's also in the film, his daughter, Lily, is a non-speaker, and he said, so often I'll just want a short answer from her, like, "Do you wanna go biking or have dinner?" And, just come on, bike or dinner. And she'll start smelling like, well, it's a beautiful day today. And though I would like to go biking, a walk would feel great. And he's like, just up, you know? And, and so I think there's this real intention around what's being said, how you say it, not mincing words. And you have to be very patient because it can take, 2 minutes to get a sentence out that for us would take a few seconds.
Yeah. So I just want to backtrack a little bit because obviously, when you started down this road, being a scientific person, as you mentioned before, you would have had some doubts about what you were going to find out. So, was there a moment where you thought, "Okay, this is real, and all my doubts have been erased, and now I can talk about this with confidence"?
Yeah, I mean, it was really a long journey because, first it was like having Dr. Powell talk about this and kind of reviewing her tests, which were really, really concrete and bulletproof. And it just felt so hard to believe. So then I called her camera guy who set up the original cameras for her like scientific tests. He wasn't filming it for any reason except for just science. And he was like, it was so mind-boggling. He's like, there's no way anyone could cheat. There's no way anyone could see anyone that he was just so startled by it all. And then, I was able to witness a lot of that on my own with the tests, but pretty quickly the tests become irrelevant because you're talking to parents who are all having the same exact situations, which it was there before spelling. It doesn't have to do with, I mean, they find out the extent of it once their child starts communicating. But in many cases, the parents will have the same idea or the same experiences. Like, I'll just be sitting there thinking, I want nuts. And next thing you know, like my child will come in with nuts or like I need my purse and they find that. Or I'll be reading something upstairs privately, like in my whatever article, and I'll start crying. And then they like burst into the door to hug me or something because they know I'm sad. Or I will hide the Halloween candy the second it comes in the house because I don't want them to eat it. And like the second I think about where I hid it, like they're there. So it was stories like that, one after the other, that was so universal of parents saying, "Look, like, I always knew that there was something, like, that it felt like the deep intuition or they read my mind, but it wasn't clear until, we had Dr. Powell come test it." And now, thankfully, even just having one scientist come test it, it's hard to believe. So we had other scientists be a part of the, podcast and now even way more so with the film. And what's so great is it was kinda like my experience, like, it's not, like, hard. It's not like you're looking for a purple unicorn out in the woods. It's like you go sit with a non-speaker who you trust that you're approaching with love and kindness and, belief, really, and boom, they'll show you just there. And so I think anyone who's kinda come into this world has been like, "Oh, okay. Yeah." So I think once I started seeing all other people seeing it and from all walks of life, and hearing so many of corroborating stories, and again, just not in America, just not from any race or creed or religious background, like it's really that widespread. You start to have to understand that, this is real. The other thing I think that's, we did a wonderful science roundtable for the film that was so fascinating. And one of the scientists said, tests can likely, show what's going on and we can do more telepathy tests. But the scientist said, you can also really kind of come up with a very strong scientific theory based on anecdotal evidence. We didn't go test whether or not, radiation from x-rays cause cancer. We had a lot of people telling us, I have cancer and I think it's based on this x-ray or whatever it was, that like you can learn from observation and through personal testimony that's widespread as well. And this has been a journey for me in understanding how science grows and learns um and yeah, so to answer your question, I mean, it was a process, but I think there becomes a point where any way you slice something, you can throw whatever you want at it. And there's been so many things thrown at this, which there should be. It's a huge, wild claim. And I went through my own process doing that same stuff and nothing breaks it. And that's when you kind of realize, like, okay, there's a truth. And that's where I became like pretty full throated about the fact that this is true. I mean, if it was like a bunch of people trying to pull the wool over my eyes or science's eyes or trying to, make a bunch of money and like go on the road, but none of that's happening. Like these people have nothing to gain and everything to lose, you know?
Yeah, that's often the skeptical position, isn't it? It's like, oh, it must be fraudulent, but there's no real depth of thought and analysis that goes into that attitude because you only have to think about it for a minute and you go, well, what could possibly be the advantage in doing that? And the more likely it, is that it's just true, and that's what it is. I was thinking about one of the early episodes of the telepathy tapes because I've listened to all of season one. It was the non-speaker who had all the stones and
Yeah,
the
Houston.
crystals,
Yeah.
and that was when I thought, oh, this there's more to this than it's just telepathy. Like there's more going on. Um,
Yeah.
was there a similar moment for you where you thought, oh, there's a lot more here than what I initially thought there was?
Yeah, because I was so interested in the telepathy, and most of the families would be like, like, why? There's so much more." And thought, "What?" And then I felt like they kind of doled things out to me at a pace that I could understand, you know? And so one thing is speaking to spirits, and that feels so hard to believe. And I guess, but if you can make the leap that telepathy is happening, then do you have to make the leap that consciousness might not just evolve in our body, and why couldn't it just, whatever? And that would make sense. I think the other thing was so unbelievable was the hill, understanding that so many families were saying my non-speakers know each other and that they're connecting. And what's fun, like in episode 2, our next season comes out October 15th. And in the second episode, we really look into a non-speaker who is a medium, but can also connect with people on the hill. And like we do some brain scans to see like how that works. And what was fascinating about this family's experience is that after the telepathy tapes came out, so many more families were becoming more public and vocal about this type of thing online. And these families found the kids' friends from the hill and were able to verify it. So, I mean, even the hill, like I know so many people have talked about it and so many non-speakers talk about it. And there's always that part in the back of my brain, but can it actually be possible? It's so unbelievably, how can it be? But then once all these individuals started connecting in the real world and they knew each other's names and their parents and they could tell their parents how to find them and where they lived, it was like, I think for a lot of parents too, it was like, okay, that's real, And then something started happening with one of the science teams, not involving Dr. Powell. Like this is a completely independent science team that started looking at the telepathy and doing these formal telepathy tests. And the way the non-speaking individuals in that test kind of showed, at least what I took away is like, okay, this is silly. We should not be testing them anymore. They're trying to show us that we're asking the wrong questions really, because they kind of were playing. I don't know if it was like a game with timelines, where someone would be shown the cue in a different room and have to telepathically send that cue to someone in a way different room. And that speller would start writing something and it would look wrong. And then they'd say, when they put the cues together, okay, they bring that speller in and here's what you're looking at. Was it the same? And, that the scientist would because it was all triple blind and then fight out if it was a match. Often it'd be like, okay, well, this wasn't correct. And the speller would be like, no, 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 this is the video that this person will randomly get later in the day. And then the scientists would be like, okay, because these are generated from, hundreds, if not thousands of videos that just randomly a computer will throw one out. The scientists don't even know which video is thrown out until after it's been like sent and received, like 30 minutes after the test is done. Then the scientist knows what video is sent. And then the next speller would get one wrong and say, oh, no, no, this is the video this person's going to get later in the day. And the scientists start giving it a name, a telepathy train, because they were basically being like, we're not just going to tell you the video you're trying to send to us telepathically. I'm going to tell you the video that this person is going to try to send to this person telepathically 2 hours from now. and it would be correct. And so that was kind of like, I think for a lot of the researchers involved were like, "Oh, this is so much bigger than just telepathy. Like, there's an expansiveness to whatever this is, this consciousness that they can play with." Or at least these individuals that they were testing could, that is inexplicable based just on our narrow definition of trying to test telepathy. I mean, how do you explain that? They're like going into the future or
Mm.
remote viewing into the hard drive. I have no idea. Like, it just brought more questions than answers, if that makes sense.
Well, it's the asking questions that's important, isn't it? It's like you can suspend your you've got whatever you've got to support your own beliefs, but at some point you have to go, well, what I don't know at the moment isn't sufficient, and I've got to keep on asking questions. I think that's where scientists sometimes, Dr. Powell is an exception for sure because she kept asking questions, but sometimes science goes, well, we can't measure that, so therefore it can't be true. But do you think that that attitude is shifting at all?
I think absolutely. I think for one thing that so the telepathy tests that I'm aware of have now been done at University of Virginia, Stanford, University of Oregon, um, through an independent group that was led by a former Northwestern neuroscientist in Chicago. There've been quite a bit, and what's really fascinating is I think that's all gonna I think within, like, months, if not years, all the research will be out, which is gonna, like it's very it's very validating, let me put it that way. Um, but one of the things that the scientists were talking about, it's again, it kinda stopped being like, "Is telepathy happening?" One of the questions they were asking is, like, how many types of telepathy are happening? Because there's one that I think some of the non-speakers are really good at, which is, like, in the same room, and it almost feels like I can, like, just dip over to your consciousness here, and I don't know, I can't say what's happening. I can tell you what it looks like. It looks like reading through someone's eyes or hearing through their ears or somehow seeing something that they should be seeing or knowing something. So what is that? And then there seems to be this more distant telepathy that we're all capable of, which is often most triggered by emergency or need or deep, deep love, right? Like, someone got in an accident, someone died. And that's one of the hardest to capture in a lab. I mean, how do you capture that? You have to make sure but what was so wild, and again, this is where I'm like, I don't know, the non-speakers seem to really know how to show things, is that we were trying to test for that first test on the film the day that we were filming one of these big tests in Chicago. And what ended up happening was the second kind, a huge involuntary, unexpected emotional need where while all the cameras and all the things and all the triple blind, all everyone's in different rooms, it happened. And it was remarkable to watch and to capture. I mean, it might be the first time ever that that type of telepathy has been captured when we were so set up for it? So, and I think that the more this research is starting to get out, like University of Virginia, a team of scientists there was like, "Can we look at all your raw data and all the raw tests from season 1?" And I was, "Sure, why not?" So I sent them all the footage, and they went through all of it. And again, they were like, "Okay, yeah, that was pretty convincing?" So I think the more scientists are looking at stuff and testing it, the more they're all starting, at least the ones I've been communicating with, are starting to say, like, "Clearly, there's something going on here." And their thought or their answer for this, I think in most cases, is that we are not we're living in a reality where consciousness is the foundation of everything. That thought is the baseline, and everything is a product of that thought, and not what we've thought for hundreds of years, which is that everything is material and consciousness is, the outgrowth, the final result of this material world. The only thing that could make something like telepathy or clairvoyance or surviving death or precognition possible or communicating beyond, right, the divide is if consciousness is fundamental and every once in a while it gets a body.
So early on, you started down this road because of the death of your two people close to you. So has that been the big shift in your worldview, as in terms of what consciousness actually is? Have you kind of got that sorted out in your mind now as to how things have occurred? Has that helped you with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if season 1 was like the warm up to like, okay, in order to explore any of this fully, we have to have a handle to believe it's true, impossible. And I mean, for me, it was understanding that the telepathy is really real. Again, like the science is gonna just I think keep unfolding how real and how vast and how deep this is. That's great. Okay, now with that, where do we go next? And that's what season 2, which drops in, 9 days, looks into, is like, okay, then what the heck is this place? Like, what does consciousness do? And so we look at, like, near-death experiences and what we know from people who've, quote, unquote, "gone to the other side and come back again," and how expansive that is, going back thousands of years from, like, ancient Sumer to Egypt to Native American cultures, and, we look at, mediumship across the divide, and that, again, involves a non-speaker who can both telepathically communicate with the living and the departed. We look at communication with animals through a non-speaker who has a really deep relationship with horses. A non-speaker who says that she can communicate with plants and understand all of their, um, many of their medicinal properties. And what's so wild is she started spelling this stuff pretty early on in her spelling journey, and her family didn't know what astragalus did, some Chinese herb or, whatever it was. So how does she know? How does she know? She's not reading. She wasn't being taught anything in school that was about this. So she wasn't really being taught anything in school, yet she knew all these properties of these herbs. So we look at creativity, and like and the many, many artists who says that it's magic how often like an idea or a story or a song or an invention or a mathematical equation comes to you fully formed, even though you had no training or you don't understand where it came from. And does that level of consciousness, when that happens to us, if we're not ready or we're not a good partner, does it move on to someone else? And there's many of examples of that in season 2. And so I think at the end of season 2, I'm hoping if people left season 1 thinking telepathy is real, I'm hoping they leave season 2 feeling like we survive. Our consciousness is more than our body. And not only does it survive our body, but it's a part of something much bigger that's actually really playing with us while we're here and alive, and seems to have an agenda and a will of its own. Um, and that's quite remarkable. Um, so I think, yes, and I think so much of this we're still trying to figure out. It's been fun. Like, we've been trying to do kind of our own experiments to chase some of these things down that feel so unbelievable, like those kids that can see through their eye, blindfold. And we've now been to like 3 different, places in the world of watching this. And then I just try to put my own kids through it, thinking, well, if this is completely BS, they're going to let me know, because they don't believe in anything. They won't stand for anything that's not like really cool and actually happening. And they started doing it. And I was like, what the heck? So I've stopped doubting a lot. I mean, I doubt everything, and we're super skeptical as we go through it. But what I'm finding right now is if you really dive into a world and ask the questions and keep pressing and try to bring in the right people to do experiments, like, it's pretty mind-boggling how much we've dismissed that I don't think is as dismissible as once believed. That was a
Mm.
long sorry, that was a long answer.
Well, it's not hard for me. Well, I think I was a believer in before I began this channel, but after you speak to I've spoken to a lot of people who are mediums and a lot of people who have had near-death experiences, and it's like you're saying, the anecdotal evidence really starts to stack up. And it's not just that. I mean, most of us aren't really silly, and you can kind of tell when something is false and when it's not. And I think that's what happens when you're with the parents and with the non-speakers. Like, it just has a feeling about it that is completely real and true. So I think we've kind of got to look at that. I mean, that's not a scientific thing, but I feel like it kind of is, or it should be.
It kind of is,
That
though.
feeling you have,
I think you're right.
yeah, yeah.
Because we all have that too, right? Like if someone were to go see a medium or a psychic, you know right away if this person's like pulling your leg and just saying the most generic things, and nothing's landing, and they don't know, and they're reading you for clues and throwing. But then there's those people. Every once in a while you meet the people who are like, no, 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 no. Like, this person knew really intimate, deep facts that no one could have known, that there's no way, da da da, this conversation. And that's the type of stuff where it's like, yes, there's so much noise. There's a lot of clutter. There's a lot of fraud. There, all that has adorned worlds like this. But that doesn't mean you throw it all out. There's also a lot of bad doctors. There's a lot of bad priests. Like, you don't. It doesn't throw out the whole thing. Like, you have to go look at the good stuff and really explore that to find your truth, right?
I think it's worth mentioning. I think one of the messages that is important for you is the validity of spelling and spellers learning how to spell, and that is not still not really an accepted method of communication. So could you talk a bit about that? Because I think it's important that a lot of that maybe some parents are out there who have non-speakers and don't know about this yet, and maybe there's reasons why they don't know about it. Could you talk about that for us?
Yeah, so there's a long, sordid history with what has become the catch-all term of spelling, which is, pointing to letters to communicate. And spelling to communicate first came around, I believe, in the 90s through something called facilitated communication, which was really created to help cerebral palsy and people who had a very hard time, like knowing where their body was in space. And it would work by putting pressure on someone's wrist, and the person with cerebral palsy could communicate. Um, and then it was quickly discovered, oh wow, this could actually work for people with apraxia too, who often also don't know where their body is in space, don't know where their arm is, don't know where their head is, don't know where their feet are, and that can be really helpful. So when facility communication kind of took off there were a few bad practitioners, really. I mean, you really have to train, you really have to know how to do it. And there were some sexual, accusations that came around regarding, I mean, there was actually quite a few consent and other things or accusations around abuse that turned out not to be true. And kind of, I think almost all facilitated communication was like, just, okay, it can't be real. So, which it was really actually horribly unfortunate because a lot of people who were using this to communicate and were communicating their own, thoughts were had their own version of communication, their only way of communicating taken away in school. And so it took a lot of people who'd been brought into the kind of the fold of society, like back into the shadows of silence. And it's really devastating. But then a few programs kind of, okay, we're going to start spelling to communicate in a different way where there's no touch involved. So a few things have popped up: rapid prompting movement, spelling to communicate, communication for all, the speller's method. And they all are kind of a version of the same thing, which is do not touch the person. You cannot have any physical content. And that's also, I think that's great for some people, but I have watched how physical contact just a little bit can help a speller just ground and then start spelling really fast when there's touch, and like it can slow down a lot when the not touch isn't there. So again, I think families have to be like, what's most important? Do you need to get something out quick? Do you not? But for the most part, if you're doing it in school, that type of thing, like there's absolutely no touch. Um, at some point along the way, um, there was this message passing test that people were like, okay, let's make sure these are their own words. Can we pass a message passing test? And what was really interesting is often they'd put a parent or someone in a different room, and the speller would start to spell what the parent was seeing. And a lot of people have gone back and look at these tests are like, "Th- that was telepathy." But at the time, like, how would you explain that? You couldn't. So it's like, okay, well, this is a weird thing. We don't know what's happening here. There's some sort of strange thing where they're typing what this person's seeing. And what's really interesting when you go start to talk to communication partners and parents, they'll say, oh, yeah, that absolutely will happen a lot if you don't clear your mind. Or like I know some practitioners who will just say, I repeat something in my head all the time: pumpkin, 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 or start singing a song or start doing something. And often the first, words that the non-speaker might once the song starts, it's like, "Can you stop singing that song over and over?" Or, "Can you stop saying pumpkin?" Like they hear it. And so a lot of practitioners have been or will just get to the point where, like, I know I have to completely clear my mind. And so what's been great is one of the neuroscientists who was trying to do some of the telepathy tests and looking into this, I think when she started meeting families and gaining the trust of the families to test them, so they didn't just feel like lab rats, right? But, like, wanted to be engaged in this. The family said, "Look, like, our kids have to pass a message passing test. So can you also do a test for that, or like figure out the protocols so we can like show that authorship is real?" And I love it because this neuroscientist saw that's what's important to these families. It's not showing the telepathy test. That's no problem. They want to prove that their kids' messages are real. And so she came up with these wonderful protocols, which is a science thing, right? Of like how you do this test and all this stuff. And the kids are passing the message passing test now. So it's just so great that I think scientists are looking at this in a serious way because that's huge. Proving authorship is huge. Um, and again, I just have to like give my heart so much to these families because again, when your sister or daughter starts communicating about something you've never taught them, right? or knows every word to the Gettysburg Address or something when it's not something no one else in the house knows. How can you explain when they're spelling it? So it's like for the families, they know that these are the kids' thoughts, but it's just that like discrimination, I think, in the world, um, that has just couldn't believe that these people were in there. And I think that is not new. We saw that happen with sign language, which took over 100 years to be accepted into the schools. People with you know, hearing disabilities or deaf or near deafness were told for a long time you have to learn to read lips. You have to learn to read lips and then try to speak on your own. You can't use sign language. When Braille first came about, no one believed you could read through your finger. Think about how wild that sounds. Reading through your finger and spelling or typing through poking dots on a page. And I went back and read the Louis Braille's story when I first started working on this because a few parents said, "Kai, this is not new. Go look back at all these forms of communication and what they went through." And it was remarkable because when they were trying to these, blind children were trying to prove at this school for the blind that they could use Braille, which was banned, which was burned, which was taken out of the schools. Like, how dare they do this?
Right.
And when they were trying to prove that they could do it, a lot of the people in the room and journalists and stuff were like, "They're cheating. They're obviously cheating. Someone planted the word and they're da 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 da, but it's obviously not real." And they had to go through test upon test to prove that Braille was really, they're communicating. So if you look at the scope of human history, no one thought blind people were in there. Not many people did and didn't think there's no way they could communicate. It's the same happened to the deaf, and the same thing are happening to the non-speakers. Um, and history will bend in the right way. Once again, it always does.
Yeah, there's always the battle against the status quo, isn't there? It's always there. It always will be. Um, but you said before you're hoping that season one would introduce people to the idea that telepathy is real, and then there's more to that in season two. But I can tell you, it was when I forget the name of the non-speaker, the one who died, who
Oh, John
drowned.
Paul.
Yeah, John Paul. Bawled my eyes out in that episode too, by the way, and I probably will again. So it was when his girlfriend and the others said that they had communicated then on the hill later. That was kind of like, well, that's not just telepathy. That's the bigger thing that's going on there. There's the example of that they could pass on those messages from John Paul. And yeah, so just wanted to mention that. I thought that it was pretty early. It was sort of midway through the season, I think, when that occurred, and that's when I started thinking, oh, there's a whole lot more here than that. And but maybe that's because I've been exposed to it so much. But I'd say there's a lot of people that have already sort of made that leap from, well, it's not just about telepathy with the non-speakers. There's more, that's going on there.
That comes out majorly in a film because there was another. I don't want to give it away what happens, but there was another occurrence of that we just could not anticipate happening. Like no one could anticipate John Paul would die. That was the most tragic thing ever. And the fact that non-speakers were saying to his mother, "I knew that was going to happen. He came and said goodbye. This is what he's saying from right now. This is the message. This is what he looks like when I see him right now."
Yeah,
And it was being
yeah,
corroborated between people who didn't know each other. I mean, yeah.
yeah. It was both beautiful and tragic at the same time. Um, so the You could consider the telepathy. I think I've heard you mention it's the tip of the iceberg.
I think it was mm, maybe like a year into all of this for me, with the non-speakers and discovering that however consciousness works, um, the non-speakers that I knew and that were participating in this project seemed to be able to tap into most of it. Um, and 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 then I've seen that play out not many times. Like there's one episode of the talk tracks, which is like the companion season where we unpacked the first season of the tapes, and we'll do the same thing with season 2, these talk tracks episodes. We haven't even put it together yet because it's like, what? We're still trying to understand it. But where a non-speaker in Chicago or in Illinois was using a word that had never been used before that I know of. And the mom was in the room and the teacher was in the room and they were like, "What is this word?" And I don't remember the word right now, but they couldn't figure out what this word was. And they Googled it and looked it up and they couldn't find it. And then I think they went to ChatGPT and it's like, "Is this a word?" And ChatGPT was like, "This is a word that, has stopped being used in like the 1200s, but the word means this." And they went back because often when someone's spelling, you kind of keep a written dialogue so you can like go back and remember the words or what they said. And he had used it the exact right way in the sentence. So they asked him the next day and they're like, "How did you know that word?" And he's like, "Oh, I learned it from the Spanish magistrate, um, that was around in like the 1400s." And they were like, "What?" And then so it brings up a lot of questions like, well, what is that? Is that like a past life thing? Is that like like consciousness time traveling thing? Do we have an informational field surrounding us that, this gentleman could just tap into? Um, and sometimes, and I think this has been as my experience, but I know for a lot of parents and teachers as well, is that like when you push too hard, it'll sort of be like, I'm not going to talk about this anymore today or not at all. And it'll just come up again when they want it to. And so sometimes it's like, well, just get all the answers at once, but it's hard. I mean, it's hard to sit there and spell and spell and spell. And sometimes it goes really fast and there's a lot pouring out. And sometimes it's a slog. So that has, I know my head is completely confused right now with what is going on and like what we saw in the telepathy tests with like answering the next person's video instead of the one that they were being sent. What is that? And it just has my mind bent over backwards around what consciousness is, and is it an informational field, or is time completely irrelevant, and people who can tap into consciousness in a much more profound way, can they tap into time that same way? Um, it just makes you wonder.
Yeah, I think of it as so. If you think of consciousness being fundamental, and you think of time as a construct of consciousness, then it kind of makes sense that when you get out to consciousness, then time is a flexible thing. We can't, our brains can't deal with that because it's a fundamental part of our existence. But I think that yeah, once you get outside of into the consciousness itself, it makes more sense because it's not constrained by time. Consciousness is what it is. It actually if it creates everything else. But still trying to wrap your head around it is not simple. Now, I forgot to ask you about the hill because some people who are familiar with the telepathy tapes will know what the hill means. But could you explain what that actually is for those people who are new to the whole topic?
Yeah. So pretty quickly into this exploration, right? I mean, uh, one of the first baseline things was okay, the non-speakers individuals that we were meeting seemed to be able to read their parents' minds pretty effortlessly, and if you tested it, they could write down what their parents were thinking, like, a number or word or whatever you just showed them, and so that was fascinating, but then pretty quickly thereafter, some parents started saying, "It's not just us, they can telepathically communicate with each other, they don't have to be in the same room." And I thought, "What?" And then, that seems hard to believe, right? But then more and more parents started communicating that, yeah, this is true, or my child does this, or they talk about it, and they'll tell me sometimes who's there, who they've met, or what they are learning on the hill, or how they're helping support one another. And then at first I was like, okay, this is just an Atlanta thing, because I heard about it from so many Atlanta people. And I thought maybe like the 5 kids down there have figured out some sort of like beautiful hive mind type thing. Like we've seen it in nature. So maybe that's possible. But then where I think I almost fell off of my chair was when talking to there was a like a minister from a mega church in Arizona, and he had figured out on his own that non-speakers are telepathically communicating, and one of the parents put us in touch, and they were like, "Oh, Joe, you should meet Kai." And I started talking to him, and the podcast wasn't out yet. I'd met him before the podcast came out, and he was like, "So," and he's like, "And there's even other things I'm discovering. Like, for instance, the other day, one guy was on the phone call with another guy in Minnesota, and we were helping them spell back and forth and, typing into the thing. And he spelled, 'I'll see you on the hill,' and the other one knew exactly what that is. And he's like, 'What do you think that meant? They must have a place that they know of.'" And I was just like, "Oh my gosh." And, because I had never heard of it out of the context of Atlanta. And then there was like a teacher I met, and I think she was in Pennsylvania, and then she brought it up that her students are always talking about that. And then this other person who runs a spelling um, like, center in the Midwest brought up the hill. And then I was talking to this man in Israel and his son, who's a lot older, like he's maybe in his 50s or 60s. And he was like, "Oh, yeah." Like, he's like, "We actually have a hill over there." And then I started talking to some parents about that and being like, apparently there's more than one hill. And they were like, "Yeah, duh. It's like a chat room. It's like a telepathic chat room where the non speakers can kind of tune in and hang out with one another." And There is more than one. In fact, some non-speakers are now talking about something called the yellow room. I don't know what that is. And so,
Oh,
yeah, it seems like a construct, that's a very real place, but it's more accessible through a mental state than a physical state. And, one thing in episode 2 of season 2, one of the non-speakers kind of talks about, um, how what non-speakers look when when they are, when she's telepathically communicating with them or visually seeing them in this consciousness state versus a spirit. That's a fascinating comparison, I think. So, yeah, it's that's the hill, and it is what I have found a very significant place in the lives of non-speakers, because one thing that has come up, like, we have so many words now transcribed from non-speakers for the film, so much of it, like 90% of it won't even get in there, it's only an hour 2 hours long, this movie, but one thing that comes up over and over, I noticed in their writings, was, like, we go there to support each other, to encourage each other. There's so many people who are still locked inside, who still can't spell, who still can't communicate, who are devastated. We're constantly supporting them, we're sending them love, we're lifting them up, and that's when it felt like, okay, there's a huge community of support around those who are still really very much locked away. And like one of the non-speakers in season 2 talks about that she's constantly kind of being, for lack of a better word, almost like harassed by another non-speaker who's not been learned to spell, and she wants help and she wants to be let out and she can't get out because her parents won't
mm.
teach her. I don't think they believe that she's in there. And so, the Hill is a very loving space for people to really, support each other.
So the film is coming, you're developing that. So what story are you hoping that that project is going to tell us that you haven't already told through the Telepathy Tapes podcast?
Yeah, I mean, there's, like, one story that's the same, and that's this John Paul story that's in the film,
Mm.
but a lot of them are really new. There's a non-speaker named Cedric, who we watch his whole journey, like, who starts locked inside and how he comes out of his, learning to spell. There's a non-speaker named Nina that we did not meet in the podcast, and she actually has a boyfriend named Winston. He was not in the podcast. Um, Kyle is in the podcast, the musician from England, so, people will see him again, but, yeah, there's a lot of, like, new spellers, and then there's the big science storyline of, like, what happened with the podcast was me just going around making sure this was real enough that I should spend my time and money and a reputation pursuing it. Um, but in the film, the science kinda hits into overdrive as people are really trying to figure out what's happening, how this happens, culminating with, some telepathy tests from different rooms, in 3 different rooms, and even in different states, and how that bears out. So, I think the I think the science is gonna make people really tune in because it hopefully answers a lot of questions.
Finally, after all you've witnessed, what do you think the children and their families are teaching us about the true nature of consciousness?
I mean, yeah, I mean, every non-speaker that I've met has they just want us to know that we're connected and that it's all about love and that we're asking the wrong questions. I've actually got, after like all the telepathy tests that have been going on, I think many of the people who've been going through this work now, or the families and teachers and scientists, are like, they're trying to let us know, like, we need to be now focusing on amplifying their needs and connection to the world, like that, and be teachers of I think um what they understand to be true of this consciousness that we're swimming in, that binds us all. And it's always a message of love, a message of love. The things that don't matter are the things that every great thinker has told us since the beginning of time. Money doesn't matter, success doesn't matter, power doesn't matter, domination doesn't matter. What matters is being present in the moment, um, treating every living thing with respect, and knowing that what we do to one person happens to all of us because we are deeply connected.
Well, that's a great way to finish. Kyle, the work that you're doing is amazing. I love listening to the podcast. I know it's a lot of work, but it's some of the most important work I think that you could possibly do. So I really wish you
Thank you.
well. Wish you well with the movie as well. And thanks for being my guest today.
Thank you. October 15th, second season drops. Thank you for having us, Rod, and congrats on all you're doing as well. Appreciate it.